Phil Steele, a couple more minutes here. Phil Steele's college football preview. It is out exclusively at Barnes & Noble, and you can also, we'll have Phil tell you if you're someone that likes to just get it online, the availability there. That's at your fingertips. You can get that immediately. Phil, I was looking, you projected what the AP preseason top 10 will be, and you got Georgia there, number 1, Ohio State, Texas, Oregon, 2, 3, 4, Alabama, Notre Dame, Michigan at 7. When you look at Michigan's schedule, they play at Ohio State. We already mentioned, they host Texas in week 2. And then now you've got Oregon in the Big Ten, and Michigan will host Oregon on November the 2nd. When you put all the numbers in there, how did Michigan's schedule rank for you?
Yeah, I've got Michigan's schedule ranked number 15 in the country, so it is pretty tough. And really, when you look at it, to me, I've got them favored in 9 of their 12 games. I've got the Oregon game around a toss-up. I've got them as a slight underdog to Texas and definitely an underdog at Ohio State. I think that Oregon game is huge if you're a Michigan fan. If Michigan defeats Oregon in the Big House on November the 2nd, I think Michigan clearly makes the playoff this year. A loss there, though, could mean 3 losses, which might make it tough to make the playoffs. So I think the game in Austin is huge. Of course, the game against Texas is huge. I'm not saying that Michigan's going to definitely lose. I just have a slight underdog in it. So I think those 2 home games, they've got to at least split them to be able to get back in the playoff this year.
Yeah, a lot of the conversation is about that new 12-team college football playoff, and a lot of people have been running the numbers and thinking about, well, if you have 1 loss and you're playing Ohio State on that last week, what happens if you lose 2 times in a row, or if it was Ohio State that lost 2 times in a row, would a 3-loss team be able to get in there? And my answer to that is maybe. There's a lot of things that have to play out. But if you, has there been much talk about that when you're having conversations across the country with people that are interested in college football? Of course, this new playoff.
Yeah, I do think a 3-loss Big Ten or SEC team is going to make the playoff out of one of those 2 conferences this year. The conferences are too big, too strong not to make it. The way I see it, Dennis, I see the Big 12 champ getting in, the ACC champ getting in, Notre Dame getting in, the Group of 5 team getting in. Those 4 are locked in. And then the other 8 spots, you're probably looking at 4 to 5 SEC schools, 3 to 4 Big Ten schools. And I do believe between the SEC and the Big Ten, we will see a 3-loss team get in there.
All right. I like that. I wanted to ask you, Michigan playing Texas, Quinn Ewers, you already mentioned him. They play Oregon. We talked about that. Dillon Gabriel, the transfer from Oklahoma. He's a lefty, 6 years. When somebody had asked me, who do I think is better, Ewers or Gabriel? I said, I got to ask Phil Steele that question. How did you rank those guys, right next to each other, or who'd you give the nod to?
Yeah, I would say when I look at the individuals, I would probably lean a little bit with yours maybe, but I think Dillon Gabriel is going to have better stats this year because Oregon throws the football better, and Oregon probably has a little bit better. Well, the depth is really close. I mean, they both have excellent backup quarterbacks, but, when you look at last year at Oregon, Bo Nix had 45 touchdown passes and 3 interceptions. So it's a really quarterback-friendly system. And Dillon Gabriel, while he didn't have those type of numbers, he had 30 touchdowns, 6 interceptions last year. I think he comes in and thrives. He's got my number 1 receiving core in the country to throw to. So statistically, I think Gabriel has the better year.
Phil, Ohio State, you got it number 2. Michigan has beat Ohio State 3 years in a row. And you look at the Buckeyes, what they've done in recruiting, the transfer portal, a lot of the players that they brought back that could have gone to the pros. I mean, they're really, it's really an impressive roster. What about Will Howard? What do you make of him? There's a game that I watched him when he was the quarterback of Kansas State, and he looked great. And yet I've had people say, hey, go check out the game that he played at Oklahoma State. He looked terrible. What do you make of what I think is going to be Ohio State's quarterback, Howard, the transfer from K-State?
Yeah, I think Howard wins a job as well. And believe it or not, had Will Howard stuck around at Kansas State, he probably would have lost the job to Avery Johnson this year. So that's something to point out. But in the same token, I think Will Howard fits the Chip Kelly system better. In years past, they've been a little bit more pass happy. I think this year they've run the quarterback more. They've got depth at quarterback, like Devin Brown being the backup. That's a nice backup to have because he's also a mobile quarterback. So I think you'll see him run the quarterback more. Will Howard did lead Kansas State to the Big 12 title. And look at the surrounding talent he's got. It is probably the biggest question on Ohio State, but in the same token, you've got a veteran quarterback that's a 3-year starter that already led his team to a conference title in the Power Five. I think Will Howard will come out with a pretty good season this year with all the surrounding talent they have. And, Ohio State's talent this year is Michigan has partially itself to blame because I think a lot of these guys stuck around because they've lost 3 straight years to Michigan, and they can't say they went their entire Ohio State career without beating them. So guys like Ty Hamilton, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, who all could have gone to the NFL draft, said, you know what, we're going to come back and play our senior year, and then they added in a bunch of transfers. So this is definitely a talent-laden Ohio State team and very experienced.
Well, you can't do this, Phil, but I wish that in part I could. I wish this year's Michigan team could play last year's schedule, and then last year's team, which was so loaded, could play. And then, because Ohio State looks like they're a lot better team, and so that would be a collision course. If you could play that game, that's a nice game, to play. I wanted to ask you, over the years, you've got a lot of different features in your magazine, but you get to turnover margin, and Michigan led the country. They had the fewest penalties, and that's going to be tough when you have to replace so many on the offense, fewest penalties per game, but they also led the country in turnover margin. And I believe, I don't have that feature right in front of me, but you've studied the turnover margin, and I believe you think it's random from year to year. Is that right? So Michigan fans shouldn't expect automatically that they'll be back taking the ball away and then also protecting it as well.
Yeah, and Dennis, this takes us all the way back to that first year that we did the show together back in 1995, which, by the way, I greatly appreciate you having me on in the first year of the magazine and each and every year since then. But that was the first metric article. It was the only metric article in that 1995 magazine was turnovers equals turnaround. And over the 30 years, it's had about a 75 to 80% success rate, saying that if you benefited from double-digit turnovers one year, the next year you have a weaker record. And on the flip side, if you had negative double-digit turnovers one year, you had a better record the next year. 75 to 80% of the time that comes true. Give an example. Last year, USC was coming off a season where they were plus 22 in turnovers. Their quarterback won the Heisman Trophy. They went 11-3. Last year, they dropped all the way down to -1. They lost 5 games last year, which was sort of unexpected, but due to the turnovers, you didn't have it unexpected. So yes, and granted, Michigan went 15-0 last year, so of course their record will probably drop this year. I can't anticipate almost any team going undefeated this season, but having I don't think plus 19 in turnovers is going to happen again.
I hear you on that. It's the one thing I chew over all the numbers and look at them. And yeah, you win a championship, you play like Michigan did last year. They're going to have a lot. The bar's pretty high on almost everything that they did. The special teams, you go through it. So that's one part you have to look at. I wanted to ask you how you think this thing is going to unfold. I mean, that leaves you a lot of leash to do whatever you want. But I'm just looking at a feedback from Blue Wolverine, who says if Michigan gets that Week 2 win over Texas, everyone's going to have to rethink how we rank and where Michigan's at. And I think it's a good point. If Michigan's able to beat Texas with a essentially new offensive line and 10 new starters on the offensive side, and they beat a Texas team that I agree with you is going to be right there in the top 3, the Michigan's going to move all the way up, and everything that we're saying now, it's going to be looked at a lot different. That's a great thing, and also the dangerous thing about playing a big time team early.
Yeah, I agree, Dennis. And I'll tell you what, if I was an AP voter, I'm not. I'm on every award committee, but I'm not an AP voter. If I was an AP voter and Michigan defeats Texas Week 2 and Texas comes into the season number 3 in the country, and you have the defending champ and they're undefeated, I would vote Michigan number 1 at that point. I mean, it would have had the biggest win of the season. They're the defending national champ. They haven't lost forever. I would put them number 1 in the AP poll if they beat Texas.
I'm with you on that. Tell me how you think the season unfolds as you look at it. You have to make the predictions. Michigan fans are waiting for what you're going to say about them. A lot of them already have the magazine, so they have been saying things in the chat here about your prediction on Michigan this year. But how do you see the Big Ten unfolding, and then getting into that college football playoff, how it's going to end up?
Yeah, I think, as mentioned, I think the key for Michigan getting into the college football playoff is either knock off Texas or Oregon at home. I think if Michigan's got 2 losses at the end of the year, I do think they lose at Ohio State. Either Texas or Oregon, I still think they make the playoff easily with 2 losses. The Big Ten would get in. But the 2 teams I have playing for the Big Ten title this year are Ohio State and Oregon. And, you go back to the experience chart last year for Michigan, they were number 7. This year, they're number 117. Well, Ohio State is much more experienced than they were last year. And the Ducks are very experienced as well. So I think you have 2 really loaded teams, probably have better schedules. So if you look at Oregon, they get Ohio State at home. That's a plus for them. With Ohio State, they do have to play Oregon and Penn State on the road, but they could end up being favored in both games. Right now, they're actually a slight dog against Oregon, which I agree with. So I think Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Michigan, Iowa, all near the top. And I just went with Ohio State and Oregon playing for the Big Ten title. But if Michigan was to beat Oregon or Texas at home, they will make the playoff this year.
I like it. I like what you're saying. I want to tell people how to get the magazine, how to get it online as well. I got a final question. It's for Michigan State. Jonathan Smith comes in from Oregon State, and it's good that I know Michigan State fans that they're just talking about football after last year's disaster with Mel Tucker. But, they do have a sophomore quarterback in Aiden Childs who comes over as a transfer. He's a dual threat. When you ranked everything out with Michigan State and looked at them, how do you think the Spartans are going to fare in the Big Ten in Smith's first year?
It looks like a rebuilding year. Now, I went over Jonathan Smith's first team at Oregon State with them, and this team has more talent than this first team at Oregon State, but they also draw a pretty tough schedule. I mean, when you look at some of the home games this year, Ohio State and Iowa, they're going to be an underdog in both of those, and that means most of the winnable games take place on the road. So I think with the fact they come in number 115 on my experience chart, a lot of players hit the portal. It may make it difficult for Michigan State to improve much on last year's 4-win total. I did pick them towards the bottom of the Big Ten.